My name's Jose Gonzalez, and I'll be speaking about A/B testing. You guys ready? Yeah? No? I can wait. No, it's not a big deal. Cool. So a little bit about me. I do operations at a company called SeatGeek.com. We're a mobile ticketing startup based in New York. I've been a core developer for CakePHP for about 3 years now. And I've contributed in some way, shape, or form for about 5 to 6 years. You can find me online at any of these places. Before I begin, when you're building a product or a website, you probably have one of several goals in mind. I sort of like to think of these as one of two goals. Your first goal is probably, how do I make the most money possible, right? Given the available resources, how do I chug that in and make sure that I'm growing revenue, growing profit for my company? And the second one is, how do I grow as quickly as possible? So when I say that, I mean, how do you grow your user base as quickly as possible? They're not diametrically opposed. You can obviously grow your user base while growing revenue, while growing profit. But sometimes it's more important to concentrate on one over the other, at the expense of the other. A good example of this is social networking websites. Something like Facebook, for instance, they wanted to grow their user base before they actually grew revenue. So they made up ways, games, etc., that would attract users. And then finally, when they had a large user base, millions, billions of users, they could start charging them for gifts, putting ads, etc., right? So one or the other you want to sort of concentrate on. Doing both of these actually involves changing the way you do things. And when I say changing the way you do things, there are several things that you can change, right? You can do site redesigns, right? And when you do a site redesign, maybe your users are landing on a landing page, or they're landing on an event page in our case. And we can do redesigns to make it a little bit more salient, make it a little bit more apparent to the user that they want to spend money or they want to stick around, right? We can add new features, right? And a good example of this is Facebook, for instance. About 4 years ago, they launched their wall, which was constantly updating with things that other people in your network were posting, right? And this is a new feature that sort of attracted a lot of people back into the platform and sort of kept them there, right? You can also remove features. One of the things that Facebook did was they removed sort of the ability for apps to post to the wall for another user, right? So if I have friends, not that I do, if I have friends that were drunk, if I had friends who were posting things or like playing games, and those games wanted to post to my wall, it's no longer possible. And that was something that Facebook did to sort of increase the number of users who were using their product. Finally, you can simplify user flows. This can be either making it simpler for people to log into your website or simpler for people to check out, right? If you have an e-commerce platform and you make it available so that users can anonymously check out versus having to register and then check out, that's one less step, and it's likely to increase conversion rate, right? So how do you know that the changes that you're making are making an actual impact on your website, right? You can make a lot of changes. You can sort of jump to conclusions and assume that the one fix that you're doing or the one redesign is actually better for the user. You're not the user, you're just the product maker, the product manager, you're the developer. And you have a very limited idea of what your audience actually wants, right? So you want to test your changes in production, right? And I think there have been a couple talks here that said you don't want to actually test things in production. So this is a little bit about turning that on its head, right? So you want to test your features. This is the closest thing that I could find that would represent what it is I want to do. You want to test everything that you're changing, right? Not only your unit tests or your integration tests, you actually want to test the feature, that the feature works and that the feature is actually improving the quality of the experience of the user, right? Before I continue, there's a couple of definitions here. Feel free to read them. The important ones are variation. So you can have several pages which have different changes in the page, and each one of those changes is a variation on the page. And then conversion, or KPI, key performance indicator. And this is something that sort of decides whether or not your change, or whether or not your application is working, right? So if you have an e-commerce platform, people checking out, that's a conversion, right? If you're on Twitter, someone posting a status update, that's a conversion for Twitter, right? Right, so what is an A/B test? Here's the definition from Wikipedia. A/B testing is jargon for a randomized experiment with two variants, A and B, which are the control and the treatment, and the controlled experiment. This is actually a little bit verbose, doesn't make sense to me, so I rewrote it. An A/B test is a way to randomly test whether one version of a thing is better than another version. So here, for example, I have two different versions of the same page, and my A/B test might say this one on the right is better than the other one on the left. You sort of want to test a control against the alternative and see what the differences are in the conversion rate. So in our case, the control was the old version, the plain version that has like a little mini map and a small buy button against the alternate. And we want to see whether or not users check out more or click that green button more often. Finally, an A/B test allows you to test against different sets of your users, right? If I am a user and I'm in an A/B test, I want to make sure that I constantly see the same version of a given page. If I don't see the same version of a given page, the A/B test results are sort of null and void. If I'm seeing both versions, then how do I know that the change that I saw was actually affecting my decision on that web page? So A/B testing, again, is a way to test your code, your feature set in production. So why A/B test? You want to make sure that your changes are actually affecting success. If you make a change and you don't really know whether or not that's actually impacting your bottom line, whether your bottom line is growing your user base or growing the amount of revenue or profit that you have, then there's no reason for you to make that change. You might as well just go home. Again, data-driven development. Oh, wow, why is that going so quickly? Data-driven development, and you want to make sure that your efforts aren't wasted, right? If you can do something else in your application development that is actually going to have a greater impact, then it's much better that you do that rather than make the change that you did that probably doesn't make any sense. Let's see. A/B tests can be targeted at a percentage of your traffic. If anyone ever used a feature flag where you turn on a feature for 10% of your audience, an A/B test sort of works on a similar patterns where you can test a redesign or a new feature against 10% of your audience and see what that impact is on your user base, right? So you can turn it on for, let's say, 30% of your audience, see what happens, see if it's a good improvement, see if it's a bad improvement, and sort of roll back depending on whether you need to. You can require less change to actually see the effect. So again, when you're splitting up your traffic against your control and your variant, your alternative, rather than having to just switch all of your traffic to the alternative, you can just say, all right, fine, with half of the traffic I have, I can see the actual impact of my change. And then, of course, you can use A/B tests in conjunction with heat maps, click tracking to sort of see the behavior of your user with both your old version and your new version. So some of the things that we test at my company are actually like button sizes. And I showed you a version of that earlier where we had a smaller button and a much larger button. That's something that you can test. Very easy. You can sort of test the sizes of elements on your page. Testing colors. This is something that we actually tested recently, and we found out that certain users on a given page were, I guess, colorblind. And so the color that we were changing actually was decreasing conversion because we were changing it to something that wasn't distinguishable. So colors are actually pretty important to test. You can test page layout, so you can bring conversion points above the fold, and that would maybe or maybe not improve your conversion rate. You can change page text. Sometimes people get confused when they're using your features, and making it a little bit more clear or making it a little bit more verbose as to what it is that they're doing can be important. An example of that is if you're checking out somewhere and you don't have the information as to what it is that you're checking out on, the user is very likely to say, oh, maybe I'm not actually checking out, let me go back, right? So then they are less likely to convert. Finally, you can test user interaction. So let's say a user has to click on a button in order to make a form appear. Rather than do that, you can just have a form appear immediately, right? So that would be an example of something that you want to test to see if it will increase your specific conversion rate or the specific conversion point. Some other things you can test. You can add video to a landing page. If you're selling an ebook, adding a video, maybe you explain what it is in the book, might improve your conversion rate, might not. You can raise conversion points above the fold. So if someone has to click on a button and that is your conversion point, raising it above the fold might actually improve that, especially on mobile devices. It's less likely that they'll scroll, and therefore raising it up is going to improve that. You can change stuff like nouns from masculine to feminine to unspecified. And actually, like this is a good example that I like to use a lot because I know a couple people who are in the alternative sort of gender. I don't know how to say that. They're trans or something like that, and they don't want to use Facebook because Facebook doesn't allow you to set your, or didn't at the time, didn't allow you to set your gender to something else. So they went to alternative websites, right? And that increased the conversion for the alternate websites and not Facebook because they didn't give that option. You can show positive versus negative stuff. So let's say if you're comparing your product to someone else, to some other company, you can say my product is better because of X, Or you can say their product is worse because of Y. And then you can test whether or not the language that you're using is actually going to positively or negatively affect your conversion rate. And then again, you can test form length or optional required fields. So if a user has to sign up and fill out 10 or 15 different fields, or they just have to fill out their name and their email address, then you can test whether or not the shorter form is actually going to help increase conversion. So how long should you run tests for? This is something that we sort of had to learn organically at my company. We've been doing A/B tests for about 5 years now. And at the time when we started testing, we were very small scale. We had maybe 1,000 users in a given week, and that was like a very good week. And we found that we needed a representative sample size, right? So in our case, a representative sample size is not 1,000 users. In our case, it would have been 10,000 users, right? So testing against something that is more clear picture of what it is that your traffic that's coming is super important. When you have a lot of users, it's very easy to run a test for a shorter period of time, but generally speaking, you want to run a test for about a week or so. You want to control for daily, weekly, seasonal traffic differences. In our case, we are a ticketing website, so when we test against like MLB stuff, right? MLB is baseball. The baseball season doesn't run through winter, so making an A/B test for the baseball season is probably not a good idea in the wintertime. So having those tests run for a longer period of time, or at least overlap, is important. And then the other thing is that if your traffic's coming on the weekend or coming during a certain time of the day, during the week, you want to make sure that you account for that change in your traffic. And you want to account for the data SKUs that you have available. So in our case, if we're testing something on a playoff page and we don't have data for soccer or for the NFL, we can't really take those metrics into account when we're running our A/B test. We can sort of exclude them. They don't really count because we don't have data for the playoffs, in February for the NFL. Playoffs are already done. So testing workflow. First, you want to come up with things that you want to test. Obviously, this is step one. Whether or not you want to test a landing page, you want to change colors on something, you want to add a new feature, etc. You should create your test variants, very obvious. The not so obvious thing here is that when you're testing stuff using A/B testing, you sort of have to maintain both of those variants. So this is sort of like building out or upgrading your framework, right? If you're upgrading your framework, you sort of have to pause all work around the rest of your application development. So if you're making a change to your landing page, you can't add new features to the landing page as you're running your test, right? So you have to keep that in mind. Launch your tests and drive traffic to your pages. If you don't have any traffic to your pages, then your A/B tests are kind of null and void because you need that traffic, that representative sample size, in order to sort of know whether or not your results were good. Finally, you want to promote a test winner, and you want to know why your results were good or bad, right? If you don't understand your results, then you need to go back and say, okay, fine, these results were null and void. Let's figure out an alternative for this. And then finally, you want to start a new test. Right, so when you are judging results of a test, there are 4 different places that you can do. There's only one place where your test has an actual failure. It's when you have a conversion decline and you don't actually understand what the results are. So again, if you don't understand your results, kitten just died, big whoop. Everything else, you're probably okay. You can start continuing testing again. The other issue is if you don't understand your improvement, why you improved, then you sort of need to step back and say, okay, fine, why did I make the change in the first place? What was my hypothesis behind that change, and why did it improve? So there's other things that you can do with testing. Multi-armed bandit. Multi-armed bandit actually, each variant has a sort of unknown conversion rate. So you can have, let's say 3 different variants of a page, and you assign them a given amount of traffic. As the conversion rate increases or decreases on a certain variant, the algorithm will automatically switch to give one version or another more traffic, right? So you can say, okay, fine, I have 2 variants. One of them is improving my conversion rate. Your system will automatically give that version more traffic so that you improve your conversion rate all around. And so the multi-armed bandit actually is something that Google's analytics tool provides, and a lot of other tools provide this as well. But it's a little tricky to get correct. You can also do multivariate tests, and multivariate tests actually changes more than one thing on a page. Generally speaking, you want to change one thing on a page, or if you're doing a redesign, you've changed the entire page, right? So that would be an example of a multivariate page or multivariate test. If you're changing a button size, but you're changing the button size and the color, that's a multivariate test. So you have 2 different alternatives there. So you have 4 different versions. With a multivariate test, you need more traffic. So you have to run a test for longer. You have to have a certain size in order to get a confidence level that you're happy with. And it's also harder to integrate with third-party tracking tools, because you have to tell, let's say, for example, you have a tool that says this button has been clicked for this version. You have to now integrate that 4 different times or 5 different times. For multivariate tests, failures are much more noticeable and much more easy to distinguish from just a one-off thing, because okay, fine, it failed with a degree here, but it failed significantly here. So these 2 changes in combination are bad. So now I'll go through an actual case study that we had. We have our mobile website. It's all JavaScript. It's great. If you're a user, you click on an event, click on a ticket, click out to a market, and then you purchase a ticket. That's our user flow, right? So our first test had actually 2 variations, and I showed you them before. The old is something I designed on the left, and the new is something our designer made. Added a view from the seat so you can see where you're sitting, larger buy button, more structured information, map at the bottom. And the old version actually was much, much better than the new version, to the point where we were flabbergasted. We thought maybe there's a bug in the code that we wrote for the new version. Maybe someone can't actually click out, or maybe there's a bug in the software that we're using to run the A/B test. That actually proved both cases to be false. In fact, the old version had bugs where we weren't allowing people to click out, and we were still getting a much higher conversion rate. And it continued doing so for 4 different tests, right? So we tested this in multiple various ways, trying to figure out maybe there's a placement of something, maybe it's a button color, maybe it's a new redesign. And so here's an example of what we had here, right? Conversion rate and then the different versions. The old left button is something that I designed when I was drunk. I was really drunk, 3 in the morning, it was probably a Saturday. And that version was much, much better than all the other ones. And I'm not a very smart man. You can sort of guess which one is the old version again. So we have the old version is green, the old version with just the positions inverted is red, and then the new versions are at the bottom. This was test 5. Test 6, we only had 2 variants, still the same, 2% conversion rate higher. And then we gave up at round 7. We were just like, screw this. We have a good working page. Let's just leave it alone. And this was an email from my boss. We actually had multiple people on both the marketing and the dev team trying to figure out whether or not we were tracking this stuff, right? And there's probably like 3 or 4 different email chains, probably like 50 emails each. So again, A/B tests don't need to actually confirm your suspicions. If you think that something's going to work one way or the other, you have a hypothesis, right? As long as you understand what your results are, then that's fine. We understood that our results were that the new version, where we were sort of making changes to what we displayed to the user, was making them sort of uncomfortable with the purchasing process. A/B tests can just as easily invalidate your hypothesis, and that's what happened here. So as far as people here starting to A/B test, we actually built a tool called Sixpack. It's an app testing framework. And one of the things it allows you to do is give you a nice little graph. The reason why we built this is because at the time there was a tool called Google Website Optimizer, and I think it was 2 years ago when Google decided that they were going to sunset the product. So we decided, hey, we needed an A/B testing framework. We looked at a couple other frameworks out there. Most of them were either tied to Rails or Rack, or were impossible to use in multiple different languages. So we built Sixpack. A couple different things that we use it for. We actually use it for feature flags to turn on features for a given percentage of our population or of our user base. It has a JSON API, so we can interact with it from any language. And then we have multiple KPIs. So in our case, a user clicking out from a market, that's one KPI. The second one is someone actually purchasing a ticket, which we get much later. So you can start a test in any language. Here's us starting a test in PHP. You can give it sort of a unique user ID if you want to, but this is the very simple example. So I'm starting a test. I have 2 alternatives, whether or not I want to use a buy or a download as a text. I get an alternative, and I can use that as my link. And then, of course, the conversion can happen in any other language. In our case, it's in JavaScript, and this is like a contrived example where we're actually doing all the conversion here. All right, so again, start testing today. And before I forget, I need to plug something. I have a book for CakePHP. That's the code. Please buy it. You're funding all of my drinks at bars, so thanks. Do I have any questions?
How do you deal with if you have elements on the site which are across multiple pages, like main menu or something like that? Do you still test it on a single page, or do you create multiple tests, or you don't test it at all?
The question was, if you have an element that's on multiple pages and you want to change that element across multiple pages, how do you deal with that in your A/B test? That sort of depends on the element. Navigation is a little bit more difficult to do, but what we've done in the past is we just change it site-wide for our percentage of users, half of them, and then half of them get the other one. It's a little bit more difficult for that sort of stuff just because it sort of needs to not change the markup too much in order for the styling and the CSS JavaScript to still work. But it runs essentially as any other A/B test.
What happened to your hair?
Question was, what happened to my hair? The answer is Larry Masters happened to my hair, and then the other speaker, Anna, kindly fixed it up.
Do you know where my tequila or iPhone are?
Question is unrelated to my talk. Your iPhone is probably in your bottle of tequila. Any other questions?
You said you found your sample size sort of organically. Did you find it was time which was the constraint, or people? Which constraint did you think was more useful for your testing?
So the question was, how did we find our constraints and which one of them was more useful, whether it was time or sample or the number of people? It's a little bit of both. In our case, we have seasonal effects upon our traffic base. So depending on the type of test that we're running, we want to run against, a larger data set. In the winter months for us, it's more of a number of people who are going because a lot of the major sports aren't running, so we get a smaller sample size overall. So it just really just depends on what it is that we're doing. Right now, I think our sample size for most tests is about 100,000 users, maybe 200,000 uniques. So.
Is the multi-arm bandit code actually working?
The question is the multi-arm bandit code actually working? Yes, it is. It's ported from a tool called Split, which is a rack-based A/B testing framework for Ruby. And we've actually used it in production ourselves. It works pretty well.
Are you ever going to get drunk and sit and chill when I got this again?
The question is also irrelevant to my talk. The answer is probably yes. I will sit in a chair and let someone drunkenly cut my hair.
It's a request. Adding the number of conversions that are needed to reach a certainty level, like 95%.
So one of the things that our tool allows you to do is set a confidence level that you want for a given test. I think that might actually not be included in any of the clients, but you can set that we want 99% or 99.5% confidence level. But I'll see about having that changed.
So your A/B testing is more for consumer type of a consumer-facing websites, right? What about those enterprise? Population size is small.
So the question is, what do we do about testing things that are more B2B, I guess? That really just depends on what it is that you're testing. I really don't have too much experience there. I would say that if it's one or two users that are using your application, more education about how to use your application is more apt than having an A/B test. If it's across a large corporation, maybe like IBM is using your product, for instance, then I think you might have the user base anyways to run A/B tests. So really it just depends on what it is that you're trying to A/B test and what your environment is.
So do you have like a number that's worth doing it? Maybe your user base is about 1,000 or 2,000?
So in our case, when we started A/B testing, our user base was maybe 10,000 users every month, and we would run A/B tests for 1,000 of those users, and it's a little bit difficult to get valid results out of that because you have to run your A/B test for a very long period of time. So with the smaller amount of users or the smaller amount of variants, you actually have to run that test for an extended period of time. And in some cases, we were actually joking about the fact that we need to run these tests for 1,000 years before we got valid results. So really it just, again, depends on your sample size.
You mentioned that when you wrote it for the six-pack, there were not many alternatives that you could use, but recently there are a lot of tools that are software as a service, etc., that allow you what you get editors and things like that. Have you tried any? Have you looked into it?
So the question was whether or not we've looked into other tools as an alternative to six-pack. When we started writing six-pack, it was actually 3 years ago. We were sort of frustrated with Google Website Optimizer and generally any software as a service tool. Because as you use them, you add 300 milliseconds to your request time, right? So this is something that we have hosted internally. It's open source. You feel free to download it. But it added maybe 30 milliseconds of overhead, right? And so we sort of thought to ourselves, having the 300 milliseconds of overhead sort of negates any bonus that you get out of doing an A/B test, right? So something internally to your network is, whether it's fast at least, is more important than having a more featureful application. As far as us using other applications, again, we use Google Website Optimizer. For a Rails app that we run, we did use Split for a little while. And we've looked at other tools. The big thing is actually just the network overhead. Any other questions?
You have one of your examples where you change multiple things.
Mm-hmm.
How do you definitively come up with a solution as to whether it's worked or not? How do you identify which combination of components gave you that boost?
So in our case, six-pack allows us to sort of like tag each alternative with like an image. So we would say in the description. So we would say this first version, this alternative has these 3 changes, right? And you can sort of like see for yourself what the changes were. Whenever you add multiple variations to a page, you have to extend the number of tests that you're running in terms of all of the variants. So if you're changing 2 things, you're actually running 4 tests, right? You're running a control, you're running with one change, with another change, and with both changes. And so you can sort of see a gradient in that if a given change is not good, then it will affect 2 tests, but it will affect one in a more pronounced way than another.
How do you deal with caching? Because if you have multiple variations, how do you cache what's there?
In our case, we don't do caching in front of the production website. But the ways you can do that is you can set headers for your caching layer that say, okay, fine, this is the bucket that a given user should be in. A lot of the tools that do A/B testing actually either shove that thing into the user session or into a cookie, and so you can still use that to sort of drive your traffic one way or the other through like Varnish or something. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you.